When browsing through the playlist you selected for tonight, I was very pleased to see the depth and variety of tracks. And one of those being this, critically acclaimed track by Souls of Mischief. What does hip-hop mean to you and your music development?
Yeah, I mean, this song's a good one to represent the kind of musical education that I got through hip-hop as a teenager. You know, as a teenager at about the time that this track came out, and Tribe Called Quest and things like that. And it's the hip-hop culture and kind of realizing that these records were made up of samples, and then wanting to find out what those samples were. There's no internet to look them up on. You had to go and, you know, dig through dusty records and find the original sources, or talk to other people who knew that kind of thing. That I learned so much about music that way, and that has always been a big part of the way that I approach making music. I mean, you played the track Home earlier, which samples Gloria Barnes, which is, you know, an old and extremely rare soul record, which you would never find that in a flea market in a million years of searching, but it's been reissued. And I came across that track and I immediately thought, I've got to make something with this, in that same kind of impulse of like taking a loop from a record and making it your own in some way.
How did you find the Gloria Barnes sample, by the way?
Well, so yeah, this is, you know, I don't spend so much time digging through dusty flea markets anymore, and I spend more time on YouTube like everybody else does. But they're kind of, you know, people who upload really rare music onto YouTube, and that record I came across that way, I think. But also they're, you know, my close friends, a lot of them have the same interest in unearthing old music and talking to record collectors record dealers who are selling rare things and have gone to a different part of the world and discovered a musical culture there that hasn't been unearthed so much. So yeah, this is an obsession for me for sure.
Home also really has this old school hip hop vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the intention? A nod towards, the hip hop you loved when you were younger?
For sure. Very much a nod towards this, type of track, Souls of Mischief or Madlib or something like that. I heard the original track and I was like, oh my God, that's a perfect loop. And it doesn't loop in the original song. So I was like, I've got to just make a little beat out of it. And I made a kind of 1.5 minute kind of beat tape kind of thing with a hip hop beat over the top of it and the soul sample looping. And then that sat on my hard drive for months and months, a year maybe. And I was like, I keep coming back to it. It's so great. It's such a great loop. But how do I make it my own? How do I turn it into a piece of Caribou music? And it was actually only because a friend of mine was going through a situation where a kind of toxic relationship that she was in was ending, and she literally went home and figuratively went home, like to kind of reground herself and rediscover herself after being in this kind of situation. And I was like, I wanted to write a lyric about that as a kind of tribute. And I was like, well, that loop that's been sitting there for ages, that's what it's about also. It kind of just fit together really nicely in the end.
She pleases. Nou, dit is Dance Nate weer zelf. Maar die oude sample die je erin hoort is van Gloria Barnes. And she picks up all the pieces. She's going home. Baby, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. Yeah, that was the first track you released from your new album, Suddenly. We will, dive deeper into the new album because we have time till 12 o'clock at night. But I just want to know, why did you pick this song first as a single?
Actually, it was a real conundrum. Like with the last album, Our Love Can't Do Without You, was like an obvious first single. It kind of represented the album, and it was a very catchy kind of single-y kind of track. People were like, yeah, the record label was like, this is obviously the one. Whereas this album, it's very diverse. The music on this record is it's going to surprise people in a lot of ways. And so there was a big discussion out of the songs that we were contenders to be the first thing to release. It's like, well, none of them really represent the album very completely. But it was like, if you put that song out, the people are going to think the whole album's this kind of sampled soul kind of vibe. And I was like, well, the album's full of surprises. I don't mind people being surprised when they have heard the first one, and then they get a misrepresentation of what the album's like, and the next one surprises them again. And the more they hear, the more it evolves, because it's that kind of album. It's got all sorts of things going on in it.
You basically said, fuck it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to start somewhere. So, and it seemed like a good, after a while of being away, 5 years, it seemed like a good place to return to, home. Yeah.
You and I is a really emotional song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the background of this emotional song?
Yeah, so the last 5 years in my personal life have been, I've had this kind of realization that the things that the song, I realized this after finishing the album, but looking back on what had shaped those years in my life and what is reflected in the lyrics of the songs, they're about lots of these kind of moments where something happens and your whole world shifts, like something sudden and unexpected shifts, and that can be positive. My daughter was born in the back of a car unexpectedly. That was a surprise and changed things.
Wow.
But this song is about my wife and I have been together for 20 years, so her family is essentially my family. We're kind of, I feel very close to her family, and there was a death in her family of someone not much older than me that of a heart attack, and I'll for the rest of my life I'll remember getting a FaceTime call from her parents and hearing this news and just like feeling the world kind of shatter around us, and the two of us there together talking to them, and this song is about that and the way that it's shifted the relations in our family. My wife and I are both youngest children, so we're kind of accustomed to people taking care of us and looking, you grow up, Dan, you'll always be like the little kid, even though I'm 40 years old. And how that has changed, how people, because I'm very fortunate, we've got a kind of stable, very happy marriage and a stable kind of environment and our parents I'm also fortunate, both of our parents are still alive, but they're becoming elderly. And they're turning to us to care for them and people in our families. We've become that's a new role for me and a new, I'm discovering that I kind of have a strength to do that I didn't know that I had. So there's a lot of that, this song specifically and other songs on the album that have those kind of themes in them. So it's about a very sad subject, but there's still a kind of optimism and a hopefulness and warmth about it, because I think I'm an optimistic person, and I kind of want to feel like the music can be a kind of healing thing that guides me through these events in my life, and maybe other people will be able to relate to that too.
It explains a lot, because to be quite honest, the first time I heard this song, mm-hmm. and I wasn't closely paying attention to the lyrics, but just heard it, it was so warm and comforting that I actually thought that you and I was referring to love.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized this background story,
mm-hmm.
And I really like how you explained that you also found strength in this loss and this new
mm-hmm.
constellation in the family.
Yeah.
Is this also the this sudden loss? Is that also why you call the album Suddenly?
So that story, it is. That's what it represents, and also in this song in particular, you hear there's like a sudden musical shift that comes out of nowhere that kind of musically represents those moments in my life. But the actual, it's funny, I don't have the kind of clarity and forethought when I'm actually making the music to realize what it's about. It just happens by osmosis because it's so integrated, music's so integrated in my life. But the specific way that the title suddenly came up was like, right, it's the last thing that I do is figure out a title for the album. And, the record label's like, we need it yesterday. Come on, what is it? What is it? And my youngest daughter, who's just turned 3, had just added this word suddenly to her vocabulary. So she was using it all the time, because sometimes in totally the wrong context. Suddenly this, and suddenly that. And
can I have chocolate suddenly?
Yeah, exactly. She kind of half understood what it meant, but yeah. So it's very cute. And my wife was like, what about that? Our daughter's just saying this all the time. And then the more that I thought about it, the more that it represented all those things we were just talking about. and I'd play I'd be like, okay, let's sit on that for a while. And I'd play the music to close friends of mine, and they'd be describing, oh, I really like the way this suddenly happens. And the word just kept coming up everywhere once I'd had that thought. So I have to credit it to a 3-year-old, but it seems to fit.
Are there other parts of the album or songs that you're insecure about?
That's a good question. There's songs that are very, so there's songs that are very vulnerable and emotionally upfront on the record. And there's a kind of deception that I play with myself or on myself in the studio. I'm like, there's nobody in the studio. I just record everything by myself. There's no engineer or producer or anything. So I'm free to do whatever I want. And if I don't want, the music doesn't have to leave this room, you know? So, and that makes me very free to sing about personal things, to make music that's very, that I feel is very tender or unguarded or whatever. But then inevitably, when I sit back and listen to the music that I've made, the stuff that often I like the most is the stuff that I tricked myself into thinking, well, this is just for me. This is just to enjoy the process of making it, and it's too personal to release. But it's all that stuff's on the album. That's a big part of what the album is. So,
but Kieran Hepburn from Four Tet is your friend, right? Where did you guys meet?
He's one of my closest friends, and he's the person. I actually, this funny story. I was working in the UK for a summer, and I went to a music festival. I didn't know anybody in the UK. I was still living in Canada at that time, so I went to this festival. And I was just walking around the festival, checking out music. And then I saw him, and I just went up to him and started talking to him. And him and the people that he was with, that he was in a band called Fridge with at the time, were like playing a board game in the middle of this festival. And so I sat down and just kind of joined in. And I was like, wait a minute, these like people have the same kind of, I can tell I have things in common with them. Then I kept in touch with him after that. We flew him over to DJ at a club a club night that we put on in Toronto. Very like flying by the seat of our pants, making it up as we went along. And I was like, maybe if we pay for his flight and he can sleep on our couch kind of thing. And he stayed for a week, and we became such close friends, did a lot of record shopping, eating food, talking about music. He flew over just on the basis of me saying, hey, remember me? Like, it's hard to imagine that now, both of our schedules are so hectic, but he was like, that's one of the first overseas DJ gigs I ever did. We didn't give him any money. We just gave him weren't making any money. We just bought his flight, and people in Toronto didn't really know who he was at that time. So, and that was the beginning of a really fast friendship. He's the person that helped me get my music signed to a label in the first place. And he's so much of, when I look for somebody to give me advice on the music that I'm making, it's him and my wife are the two people that I turn to. They both obviously have good musical input, and I know they won't bullshit me at all. They'll tell me how they feel about things, which is invaluable. I don't know if for people who make music or make anything, you need people who aren't going to just be like, yeah, it's good. Yeah. You need somebody who'll tell it to you straight.
And Kieran also, in a way, co-produced the new album, right?
Not co-produced.
Or rearranged or arranged?
The track Home, he helped arrange, and it came about like this. I was sending him different versions of the track that I'd made, and I had one version with a more hip hop beat and one with a more kind of mellow. The track was more mellow, and I'd sent them to him like months apart. One I made a couple months ago, and then I sent him a more mellow one, and he wrote back. He was overseas at the time, and he wrote back, and he was like, I feel like it should be both. It should be like more banging hip hop beat at the beginning and in the instrumental parts, and then it should be mellow for the vocal parts. And I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. That makes so much sense. And he was like, in fact, it was just easy for me to take these two songs that you'd sent me and cut them up and splice them together. So here's what I was thinking about. And I mean, essentially, I redid it with the original parts and everything, but that's the arrangement that ended up being the finished track, which is, he's given me so much advice over the years, but that's the first time he's actually been like, okay, let me just do it. So